The 13th Crusade. They sealed the dead knight under a floor that forgot he had a name. It was a small church off the Via Dolorosa, one of the quieter bruises in the city that carried too many. The custodian kept the key in a matchbox and slept in a chair with his hat over his eyes when no pilgrim had a question. In the afternoon's pale blaze, Dr. Elias Naroun knelt beside a tile whose glaze had once pretended to be the sky. He laid 2 fingers on the hairline crack Sarnai Bat-Erden had found by listening with her cheek. Draft, she had said, the way a woman says there's a storm 3 hours down the mountain. Old breath. Now the tile lifted under a pry bar, like a sigh admitted at last. Beneath it lay a square of earth stitched with mortar, and beneath that a lid with a cross cut in relief. Simple, unfussed. Sarnai glanced at the old man in the chair. He had begun to snore. Elias made a small apology to God and helped ease the lid aside. The knight lay in his armor as if still awaiting orders, the steel dulled to a kind of humility. His hands were folded over a sword whose blade had been removed, leaving only the hilt like an unanswered question. Between the gauntlets rested a scroll canister, bronze gone hospital green, capped with a ring seal of crimson wax whose color had not learned to grow old. On the cap, the Latin was the Latin of men who carved letters because writing was too little fun. Sigillum nec tali, nec patir. Do not lift, do not suffer. We are going to lift, Sarnai said. We are going to suffer, Elias said, and the joke comforted neither of them. He teased the wax with a warm knife until it grudged him a path. The cap came away with a soft disgust. Inside, a scroll rolled tight, parchment, not papyrus, with a band of twined linen. The first line showed itself like a white throat in candlelight. Die Exercitu 13. Elias raised a brow. 13th, he murmured. Beyond the ones who made the maps. 13 is a goat's number, Sarnai said. It eats what it should not and survives anyway. They unrolled the scroll on the floor of the empty nave like rude monks at a feast. Letters marched in neat rows, a scribe's good conscience. But between the rows, as if a ghost hand had written the palimpsest of the scribe's thought, lay a second script that had no courtesy for eyes. Little hook marks like fish bones, arranged in lattices, repeating and not repeating. A net thrown over Latin to catch what Latin would not carry. A code, Elias said, both happy and exhausted, and an old one, not mere substitution. See these bones? They pattern the Salter divisions. Bidi Immaculati here, Adti Levavi there. A chant woven under a letter. Whoever wrote this wanted only those with ears to hear. Sarnai rocked back on her heels. What does the chant sing? That a crusade was called and not called. Elias murmured, chin low, fingers hovering above the lines. A crusade sworn in a chapel with the doors shut, after a failure made the greater failure feel righteous. A 13th host, not for land or glory, not even for Jerusalem. For possession. Possession of what? He shook his head. I can't see it yet. He tapped an ink symbol, a small square with a tiny V tucked into its lower line, like a bird under an eave. This sign repeats beside all names of cities and seas. It is not a letter. Then it's an instruction, Sarnai said. A thing for mechanics who pretend they don't do theology. They took photographs. They took rubbings on thin rice paper Sarnai had carried wrapped in greaseproof like a sandwich. They put the scroll back in its belly and sealed the lid as gently as a man tucks the hair of a sleeping child. The custodian stirred as they pressed the tile down. He blinked, yawned, smiled politely, and asked Sarnai a question about her boots. Where next? She asked, when they stood in the alley, heat rising from the stone like a caged thought. Elias lifted his eyes to the fissured blue. Rome, he said. The code's voice runs east to west, and then stops its breath. There are notes in the margins here, barely scratches, a different hand. Mention in Secretarium and in Domo Petri sub Petra, in the house of Peter under the rock. You just want espresso, Sarnai said, but she was already slinging her pack as if it knew the way. The Vatican loves to be a labyrinth and pretends it hates the fact. You bring a letter and a credential and a friend of a friend's favor that smells like old wine, and still the doors behave as if opening them would mean losing a piece of your soul they aren't sure they can spare. Elias had brought all 3 and a 4th, a man with a conscience and a desk inside the secret archives who owed him a debt named 1989. "Do not call them secret," the man hissed, already sweating, already glancing behind him though no one was following. "They are apostolic. It is a legal distinction." "Brother Matteo," Elias said kindly, "your boss could call them the Happy Basket, and they would still be secret." They passed through a door that liked men who understood guilt, down a stair whose stone had memorized shoes and forgiven none, along a hallway lined with cabinets that had kissed every kind of burden. The air had the chill of rooms that promise they have no heat to give you. Matteo stopped before a grate. He fitted a key shaped like an apology into the lock. The gate didn't swing so much as withdraw its permission. 3 hours, he muttered. "No more. If anyone asks, you're studying aqueduct accounting." "If anyone asks," Sarnai murmured, "we are dead already." Matteo crossed himself in the casual, effective way of men who had practiced. He left them with a little lamp that made darkness feel politely considered. The chamber beyond was larger than necessary. Most rooms that matter are too small. This one had swallowed more didactic ambition than room. In the center stood a circular coffer surrounded by a brass rail. Around perimeter, shelves and cases held things that refused to be merely objects. The air tasted of vellum and authority. Elias felt the nerves of his hands wake the way they do when you are about to be given something and cannot be sure if you should take it. Sarnai's lamp found cards with clean type, a fragment of the prophet's cloak, the hair of the queen of Sheba, provenance doubtful, a bone of a saint whose name had too many vowels, clay sealed with a mark of Ashur, a fiber of the veil. In a glass cylinder, a lock of hair so black it shone blue, bound with a ribbon threaded with gold. In a shallow drawer, a square of hammered copper from an ark that might have been any ark in any legend. On the wall, a stone from a mountain that had belonged to no one until a story gave it to God. "This is less a treasury than confession," Elias whispered, and he did not mean it kindly or unkindly. "Look, each label doesn't just say what. It says who really owns it. The text is quiet, but it says, 'We have all of you, therefore we are all of you.'" Sarnai's mouth was a flat line. Faith as collection. Faith as jurisdiction. And the coffer? Elias approached. The circle was bronze, a ring like the rim of a well. Its surface bore tiny incised characters hard to notice until you decided to see them. Greek, Arabic, Latin, Hebrew, a few he did not recognize. Pahlavi, Devanagari, old Mongol script that made his heart tilt. Between the lines, that same little square with a tucked V the scroll had favored. "It's the mark," he said softly. "The bird under the eave." Sarnai had her hands behind her back because engineering had taught her when to keep her fingers innocent. "The code has migrated," she said, "from a scroll to a circle, or the circle taught the scroll." He leaned over the coffer's lip. Within lay order turned into seduction. Not chaos. Chaos would have been reassuring. This was a pattern too large to be visible from one angle. At the bottom of the well lay a stone chest sealed in lead whose top was a palimpsest of cosmologies burnt and rewritten. Around it, on brackets that took no weight and yet carried every weight, artifacts perched. A miniature Torah wrapped in blue, a gilded Quran page framed for war, a small oil ampulla labeled St. Minas, a shard of something green and salt-smelling that might have been Poseidon's fingernail. On a finer bracket, a knife whose blade was obsidian and whose handle was a section of antler with lines that had once been a prayer cut by a man who had no word for prayer. Artifacts from every major religion, Elias said, not merely acquired, curated to face each other in a fight that only the curator wins. Sarnai shifted the lamp to the left. The light licked across the lower brackets and snagged on a dull golden curve like the smile of a god taught to be polite. A mask's jaw. Elias's breath hitched. For a heartbeat he was back with glass and a machine that ticked because it had made time a servant. He shut the door on that memory and put a bar in the latch. He had broken that lock. He was not here to revere cousins. "What is under the lead?" Sarnai asked. Elias felt the answer like a bruise forming. He traced a ring of characters with a fingertip, the little square with its tucked V repeated at 12 points. At the 13th point there was a blank. 13, he murmured. Sarnai's lamp warmed a small plaque beneath the rail. The words were careful. Sacrarium peregrinorum, sub sigillo, Pilgrim Sacrarium under seal, a smaller plaque beneath it in Italian that thought it was being helpful, only to be opened by mandate of the Holy Father in case of contingencies threatening the whole church. The whole church, Sarnai said dryly, which, in practical Latin, often means the whole world. Something moved in the bottom of the coffer. Not an artifact, not a mouse, a bleed. It welled at the foot of the lead-sealed chest like wine from ask that is decided not to hold. Thick, dark, slow, it threaded down a channel someone had carved there on purpose, either for drainage or for display, and pooled in a small basin whose rim bore little notches like teeth that wanted to count. Elias swallowed. Sarnai leaned lower. Lamp-steady as a judgment, she carried around for moments just like this. The liquid glowed. No, not glowed. It absorbed light and gave back a patient shine. The room's temperature forgot to hold. Blood, Sarnai said, voice even. Or the idea of blood, Elias said, because he told himself once that he would always give science its seat, even when science arrived late. They watched it gather. It did not spurt or gush. It accumulated like a decision already made. The smell reached them. Not iron first, but a sweetness that made hunger briefly muscular and then embarrassed, then the iron like the tongue remembering its owner. Sarnai shifted her stance. One hand had, without consulting her, found the grip of the small pistol she carried in places where she thought priests would understand. Relics should not bleed, she said. Relics always bleed, Elias said. That's half why they're called that. She cut him a look that translated to, man, not today. Matteo returned with his good intentions first, his breath second. He froze in the gate, crossed himself twice as if a perfect repetition would stabilize reality. What have you done? He hissed, because men in the Vatican are taught to ask this question even when nothing has been done. You tell us, Sarnai said. Matteo crept to the brass rail and peered down into the ring. The blood, if blood, had filled the little basin and begun to lap its notches. It did not spill over as liquid should. It climbed the copper teeth the way ivy learns a wall. 13th, Elias said softly, pointing. 12 marks with a tucked V and one unmarked space like a breath held. A secret crusade. A circle with 12 consonants and one vowel missing. Blood in a basin with teeth. Matteo grabbed the rail hard enough to leave sweat. I told myself I had made my peace, he muttered in Italian, a speed just short of praying. That the church is a creature, and creatures have rages and aches, and saints are only the harder version of peasants. I told myself the collection is a fence against bad men, a fence made from the wood of every tribe's sacred tree. But this, who else knows about this room? Sarnai asked. Enough, Matteo said, and that is too many. Somewhere beyond the wall, a bell began to toll the hour. In the coffer, the blood finished counting the notches and settled like a dog circling before sleep. End of the world? Sarnai asked. Beginning of a different kind, Elias said. A shadow moved behind Matteo. It wore a plain suit cut for a man who did not wish his body to reveal his habits. The face had a bureaucrat's piety and a butcher's kindness. It would be square if faces were corners. He carried a folder. He did not look at the blood long enough to show it had captured him. He looked straight at Elias with professional man's courtesy and said, in English salted with Rome, Dr. Naroun, Signor Haberden, please come with me. Matteo flinched. Monsignor. Thank you, brother, the man said warmly. Truly, we will give you a few extra hours in your schedule this week. This is the prefect, Matteo whispered to Elias as they followed down another corridor that pretended it didn't lead to power. Of a congregation that does not have a name, because names give people ideas. Ideas are catching, Elias said, but no one laughed. The room to which they were led was small enough to make men honest out of claustrophobia, if out of nothing else. The prefect stood behind a table with nothing on it. He folded his hands and consulted a spot on the wall, and spoke like a man who has grown used to the weight of a halo that does not belong to him. We do not call it the 13th Crusade, he said. That gives it dignity of a kind we have spent 2 centuries unteaching. We call it the interregnum. You opened it, Sarnai said, once. We never closed it, he said, and the words landed. Elias waited. The prefect had the look of a man who wished to confess, without surrendering the right to be absolved. In a century that loved trains, the prefect continued, men moved armies like liturgy. They discovered they had built a machine that would not stop, because too many hands were feeding coal. The Holy Father then, God judge him, as he will judge us all, authorized the assembly of Sacrarium for moments when religion needed to be bigger than a border. We began before him, of course. The collecting mind, he gestured vaguely to encompass the world, is old. After that war, and after the next, we continued. We told ourselves the crusades meant banners and horses. We told ourselves that if we did not collect, someone else would. He regarded his hands as if they had misbehaved. What do you think you saw in the coffer? Evidence, Elias said. A mirror, Sarnai said. Both, the prefect allowed. Something began to bleed the first time in my predecessor's stewardship, a relic of a saint whose name you would know, from a region that has never learned to leave itself alone. We tested the blood. We prayed at it. We brought in scientists who invented different words for what they could not measure. It bled when the world hurt in a certain shape, not when floods drowned or cities burned, not when famines embarrassed us. When men took God's name and tacked it to a spear, then he exhaled the way statues in Jerusalem exhale, then it bled. And today? Sarnai asked. Today, the prefect said, mass and agriculture both operate on servers. The old epithets are printed on drones and patents. We thought perhaps the basin would stay dry because the weapons had changed. His mouth tipped, not entirely ironically, but perhaps swords are just shapes we still recognize too easily. The scroll we found in Jerusalem, Elias said, the coded plan for a 13th host. Who wrote it? The ones who had not recovered from the fact that the 12th had failed. The prefect said, officials who had seen the old banners trampled and could not forgive God for being weaker than their favorite metaphor. They decided to make a war under a silence, so thick it could pass for peace. Did it march? Sarnai asked. The prefect rubbed his cheek as if it itched him. In a way, not with trumpets, with memos, with whispered authorizations, with collections. He blinked slowly. You think we do not know what we are? Do not mistake posture for ignorance. Your friend Mateo thinks we fence the world against predators. I think we built a barn and forgot to ask who owned the land beneath it. Then close it, Sarnai said. Shut the coffer. Return the things. Let the basin dry. Burn the plans. Learn to pray with empty hands. The prefect looked at her as if she had asked him to set his own child on an altar that did not deserve hunger. We cannot, he said. Then you will, Sarnai said. Silence bred like rabbits. You too, the prefect said at last. And for the first time, something that might have been admiration flirted with the edges of his voice, are older than our problems in your bones. Dr. Naroun, you broke a machine because it mistook love for obedience. Signora, you broke statues because they forgot their vocation. We have a relic pool that bleeds when men decide to launder their violence with scripture. What would you have us do? Elias found he had gripped the back of his chair, as if it might buck him. He released it, and with it, some of the anger he had been carrying since he first walked into a room where power pretended to be humility and did an average job. Publish, he said. The prefect sighed. We cannot. Then leak, Sarnai said. The prefect's smile was both a door and a wound. We already have, he said. Who do you think told you where to dig in the old city? The custodians do not usually talk to Mongolian rangers with pelican cases. And Brother Mateo is terrible at cards. The scroll, its discovery, gives us permission to pretend we were caught. Sarnai's brows rose. Elias folded his arms. This is theater, he said. This is penance, the prefect said. Elias stood. He walked to the small window and looked at a sliver of sky that had seen emperors forget what they were. He thought of Hadi's ring of circles in Sahara, of ticks under glass, of smoke that was not mysticism but memory with ears. He wondered why the world kept letting him be in rooms with a past undressed and begged not to be shamed again. Here's what will happen, he said, turning back. He felt old and honest, and hadn't that been the bargain? We will write what we can prove. That the Vatican houses a chamber where artifacts from many faiths sit not on shelves, but arranged to face each other like defendants in a court whose judge is a circle. That in that circle a sealed coffer has bled on days when men hang the word holy on their old hatreds to make them feel new. That an encoded Crusader scroll anticipated an unnumbered campaign. That its symbol, the bird under the eave, appears here as well. We will strip adjectives the way soldiers strip a field. We will leave nouns like wounds. And you will give us your manuscript before you publish. The prefect said, not demand, simply gravity. No, Sarnai said. Yes, Elias said, and saw Sarnai's head snap. He lifted a hand. We will let you read at the hour we file, to correct dates, not conclusions. If you strike names, we will say so in print. If you attempt to soften blood to wine, we will burn the whole thing down in a forum you cannot sabotage. That is not how it is done, the prefect said mildly. It is now, Sarnai said, even more mildly. The prefect closed his eyes. He looked, for the first time, like a man who understood that power was a weight that had been hung on him by too many hands, and that shrugging would break him, and not shrugging would break others. He inclined his head. Very well, he said. We are in the same boat, even if you suspect me of drilling holes in the hull. Not holes, Elias said. Port windows in the wrong places. Matteo led them back to the coffer with a reluctance that was not fear but shame. The blood in the basin had stilled. It did not harden, did not clot. It kept the imperturbable sheen of a thing that has chosen an identity and will hold it until someone makes it another. Will it stop? Sarnai asked. Yes, the prefect said. It always does. This is a signal, not a flood. What set it off? Elias asked. The prefect's eyes slid sideways, not evasive so much as tired. I do not know yet. I suspect less a battle than an approval stamped on a form. A new way to pour money on the old sin. The signatures will be sanctified, and the bombs will be applauded for being clever. And no one will ask why saints would need such precise shrapnel. Faith and hypocrisy, Sarnai murmured. Same bed, new sheets. Elias touched the brass rail. The little square with its tucked V sat where 13 should be and did not own the place. He formed a hypothesis he hoped would be wrong and likely was not. If you ever do open that lead, he said, do it where men cannot vote on what they see. If we ever open it, the prefect said, I will invite you to witness. I would rather be shot, Sarnai said. That can be arranged, the prefect said with so much gentleness Elias nearly forgave him. They left the ring and the bleeding to their keepers. The bell tolled another hour. Rome, outside, continued to feed pigeons on sin, so old the birds were polite with them. They wrote. They used words like coffer and basin and circle and encoded psalms and interregnum, and refused to use words like miracle. They used numbers when they could, dates of known pogroms and wars, days when the basin had allegedly bled, correlations that an honest statistician would not laugh out of the room. They admitted when a line could be coincidence, and when coincidence had been hired as a cover story. They did not name Matteo. Elias argued for the prefect's title and lost. Sarnai argued for nothing and won most of it. When they filed, the paper's lawyer called them unreasonable and then left them alone because unreasonable people were the only ones who had kept her employed. The editor took out 2 adjectives that had been leaning too far forward and 1 paragraph that had been written to scratch an itch. They hit publish on a Wednesday. For 3 hours, nothing happened. Then everything did. The church issued a statement with grammar. So precise, it was a weapon. The prefect called Elias and said only, we have 1,000 emails asking to worship the basin. A government spokesperson said the piece was irresponsible and then said it was ordinary, and the 2 lies met in the middle and shook hands. A certain nation's minister of religious affairs tweeted that any bleeding in Rome could not possibly be significant because Rome had never once bled for the right reasons. An anonymous account posted a diagram of the coffer that was dangerously accurate and included instructions for how to break into a room that did not exist. A bishop in a small city said from his pulpit that God does not need gadgets to judge us. We judge ourselves into hell just fine. That night, in a hotel room that overlooked a slice of fountain, so tired even its angels looked like they wanted a cigarette, Sarnai cleaned her pistol and drank tea. Elias drank his tea and cleaned nothing. They watched the news on mute and did their own translations. On screen, a panel argued without knowing how to pronounce the word relic in 3 languages. A crawl at the bottom mentioned that a new counterinsurgency platform had been greenlit by 3 committees who had each sworn approval was routine. Routine, Sarnai said. She had placed a slide in her palm and was watching it as if it were a moral decision. The opposite of mercy. Elias's phone buzzed. A message, it had stopped. M. He looked at Sarnai. The basin, he said, stopped. It will not stay stopped, she said. No, he said. Neither will we. He stood, fetched the scroll rubbings, spread them on the bed. Sarnai leaned her shoulder to his. They bent their heads over the coated bones together, like monks, like thieves. What if the symbol is not the place to end? She said, tracing the little square with its tucked V. But the place you breathe? The vowel, he said. The missing 13. The gap where meaning is put by a mouth. She nodded. Then the 13th Crusade did not need a host. It needed a throat. We gave it one, he said softly, and waited for the guilt to stab. It did not. It lay down beside him, old as bread, and then told on it loudly. You think the prefect will close the room? She asked. I think he will stay with the bleeding and choose for one more day, not to build a better basin. Faith, she said, without weapons. Faith, he said, remembering it's not a weapon. They slept in clothes that had learned their bodies. In the morning, the city did not end. It simply laid new posters over old ones and taught its pigeons another word for crumbs. In Jerusalem, the custodian held a service for no one in particular. In Rome, Matteo visited a ring and put his palm on brass and apologized for being born into this shift. In too many rooms in too many nations, men wrote checks whose memo line read security and meant surrender. Weeks later, a packet arrived at Elias's door. No return address, no stamp, hand-delivered by an employee of a service that charged enough to wrap itself in ritual. Inside, a scrap of parchment, Latin cramped, fishbone script darker and confident, a fragment cut from a larger scroll, the bird under the eave carefully inked, and a note in mezzanine Italian. When the basin fills, read this aloud. And then do not read anything at all for a day. He set the scrap in a drawer with the other obscene inheritances of his trade. He did not tell Sarnai, not because he did not trust her, but because he did not wish to make her angry. And that felt worse than his own fear. He brewed tea. He stared out a window at a city that had not asked to be a capital of anything and performed the task moderately well. He thought of the 13th slot on a ring, the missing vowel, the choice of a throat. He said aloud, to the empty room and to whatever in the world was willing to overhear, let it be quiet. And for a while it was not because wars ended. They never do, but because sometimes men forget to say holy before they stab. And that is its own small victory. The next assignment found him, as assignments do, when wind makes a door flirt with its hinge. But that is another story. For now, 2 people who had broken 2 machines that tried to turn worship into weapons sat in a room and let silence be the bravest thing in it. And the world, which is the most patient thing God ever made, permitted them that mercy.